Hello, everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections and IRI Company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com and IRI at iriconsultants.com. I am Jennifer Orquad, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Ownership culture can be easily understood by anyone who's ever rented a car. Rental cars are rarely filled with high-performance gasoline, their maintenance schedules go unchecked, and they're parked wherever it's convenient, not to avoid getting dinged by other drivers. After all, it's a rental, right? But cars that are purchased are treated very differently. A significant investment has been made with a purchased car, thought went into that purchase, and as a result, the owner has a stake in the car remaining in good condition and being perceived as a good choice. It just makes sense that the car owner would take more responsibility for the car's well-being than a renter might. Now, substitute car for company, and you begin to understand why the concept of ownership culture among employees is so valued. Today, I'm joined by Greg Milano. He is the founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors, whose current focus, in addition to financial performance, is helping companies encourage all their employees to act like owners by instilling an ownership culture from within. Greg, thanks so much for joining us here on Project HR today.
Thanks for having me on, Jen.
So, Greg, how do you define an ownership culture?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've thought about this in different ways over the years, but I think it's easiest understood like this. I mean, we all have altruistic intentions, right? We all like to help people in need. We all like to do good things for others, but we also care a lot about providing for ourselves and our family. And so when we can align what's good for the company and what's good for the employee and their family, they just tend to get more self-motivated. They tend to act more like a long-term owner in the business. And, that's really what an ownership culture is. It's getting people to act like as if they were long-term committed owners in the business in their everyday activities.
So what kinds of employee behaviors do we see in an ownership culture that we don't see in cultures that don't prioritize this kind of approach?
Yeah, there are 5 ownership traits that we talk about that are sort of the important behaviors. And, first of all, it's treat the company's money as if it were your own. We've all seen people that, spend a little extra on travel on a trip because it's not my money, it's the company's money. Your rental car example in the opening was another good example of that. In a true ownership culture, people aren't willing to spend money in ways they wouldn't spend their own money, but they're also eager to spend money when it's on a good thing. Sometimes people in a company will say, "Well, that's a really good thing to do, but I just don't have it in my budget," and that's just not a symptom of an ownership culture. People don't want to spend money that doesn't make sense, and they do want to spend money that does make sense.
Sure.
And they don't let bureaucracy override that.
Mm-hmm.
The second real trait is what we call extreme prioritization. It's the ability to find what really matters and really invest heavily in it. It's the opposite of what we call the peanut butter strategy, where people, spread their resources around the company like they're spreading peanut butter on bread, a little here, a little there, without any real discernment. We want prioritization on the things that really matter. The third behavior of an ownership culture is a willingness to fail. Sometimes we say a willingness to experiment and fail. And that's really missing more than most of the other traits in a lot of companies these days. There's been such a focus on risk management and cost cutting and profit margin maximization that people become unwilling to try anything they're not 100% sure it's going to work, and that doesn't really lead to really good innovation. More doing and less talking is another thing we see in an ownership culture. They don't seem to have 25 meetings to make a decision. They figure out what the information is that they need, and they make a decision. And the last one is they don't focus on the short term or the long term. They always focus on both. So people in an ownership culture have a real eye toward the long term, but they're also very focused on delivering results today. They really seem to be able to do both. And that's what I've seen, by the way, in my work with entrepreneurs over the years. They drive current performance as strongly as anybody, but they would never get there by cutting an R&D project or cutting advertising or cutting employee training. So it's really trying to balance and have an eye on both the long term and the short term at the same time.
And those are some really good points about how an ownership culture can benefit a company. How can an ownership culture benefit the employees themselves?
Most people dream of owning their own business. I mean, it's a charming thing, but they don't really. Most of them, at least, don't want to take the risk that comes from being an entrepreneur and sort of risking everything, especially if they have important responsibilities. In an ownership culture, people can think and act like owners, and they can get that sort of feeling that comes along with it without quite as much risk. They still have a salary and benefits, and although they might have a better interest in the success than what a lot of employees counterparts at other companies might have, they have the security that comes with being part of an organization, and they like the accountability as long as they feel that they can influence outcomes. So it's not just about giving people accountability. It's about giving them a say. It's about treating them fairly. And I like to say it's like treating them as a partner. I have a couple of partners in my business. And if I think about how we relate to each other, well, that's the way people should relate in larger organizations as well, as if they were partners with a common shared outcome and goal that they're seeking together.
So how can this kind of ownership mindset and culture benefit actual shareholders?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. I've been doing this now for over 30 years, and there's no doubt in my mind that companies perform better when their managers and their employees think and act like long-term committed owners. And it's a matter of putting those 5 traits I talked about earlier into action, and actually delivering more growth, delivering better profitability, and delivering real success for all stakeholders. It all starts with caring a lot about all the employees so that they're happy and they're doing the best they possibly can, caring about customers. We've done some really great research showing a strong alignment between companies that act with good corporate purpose and the production of results for shareholders, and the results are really, really, really solid. We've published several reports in collaboration with chief executives for corporate purpose on this, and each time we've studied it, we've found that the companies that operate with better corporate purpose, that care about all their stakeholders, that think longer term, also produce better results for shareholders. So there isn't a tension here. A lot of people want to say, well, you can work for stakeholders or you can work for shareholders. Mm-hmm. They're really well aligned. Delivering for all stakeholders is really essential to deliver over time for shareholders.
And so much of the idea behind this is helping employees have a stake in the company's success. Are we talking about a financial stake, such as with stock ownership and that sort of thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, there is actual employee stock ownership, and we certainly encourage our clients to embrace programs whereby they can have employee stock purchase plans. They can even have other types of programs where ownership is granted. But I should say that it's not essential. You can create owner-like incentives and profit shares and other financial benefits that simulate ownership, and that can be enough. It's the companies that don't do any of those things. They just talk about, improving behavior and improving culture without sort of backing it up in any way financially, that often are viewed skeptically by their employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want me to do all these things, but, put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. So, whether it's actual ownership or, as I say, owner-like incentives and profit shares, giving people a stake in that owner success is an important reinforcing attribute of this.
All right, Greg, we're going to take a quick sponsorship break right now, but when we come back, I want to discuss how ownership culture can specifically be applied to healthcare systems. So stay with us.
The relationships you have with your employees are critical to the success of your business. In today's ever-evolving political and economic climate, those relationships can also be the most vulnerable. Employee dissatisfaction can lead to union organizing activity, potentially disrupting operations, leading to costly lawsuits and negative publicity for your company. The I Labor Relations Consulting team brings with it a wide range of expertise, from former labor management executives to human resources professionals, and even award-winning communication experts. We'll help you create an environment where employees feel valued. Our goal is simple. We help your company thrive while creating a positive working environment. Get started today with a personalized labor relations readiness assessment from IRI. We'll provide you with a customized roadmap and the resources you need to succeed. Visit us at iriconsultants.com to learn more.
I'm back with Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors. And Greg, let's talk about the roles of responsibility and accountability in an ownership culture.
Yeah, I think that it's important. Accountability is an important part of being an owner, right? When you're an owner of a business, you're accountable for everything, really.
Mm.
The important thing, though, to remember is that it's not just about accountability to be accountable for making sure bad things don't happen. It's also about opportunity. And I say that specifically because this is not just about avoiding downside. It's also about creating upside. And so we want people to participate in the upside and be accountable for the downside, and we want that to be balanced. In far too many companies, you risk losing your job when things go wrong, but you don't get a sort of equivalent benefit when things go right, and
Mm.
that leads to a real heavy risk aversion, and that's really not great. People need to know how to take prudent risks, and so yes, accountability is important, but it has to be balanced with opportunity and upside.
And one of my favorite things to talk about is transparency. Let's talk about the role of transparency in an ownership culture.
One of the traits or one of the ways we encourage our clients to reinforce an ownership culture is by getting away from in their business management, getting away from measuring variances against budgets and plans and focusing more on improvements in performance. And that sounds like a sort of financially technical thing to say, but
Mm.
when you're constantly measuring people against their plan, what you're doing is you're paying them to plan for mediocrity. You're
Mm.
paying them to conceal some of the upside activities they think are going to help their performance so that they can get their target really low and make it easier to beat it. And so this measuring against plan, measuring against budgets encourages people to keep secrets. In
Mm.
an ownership culture, planning and budgeting is interesting, but it's not what you're measured against. You're always measured against last year. When things get better, you get paid more. When they get worse, you get paid less. And so there's much more of an incentive to be transparent, to present your ideas and say, well, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think of it? Rather than keeping it in your pocket, to make sure you can beat your plan. And so transparency tends to increase. Now, it's really important. The senior management in an organization that's trying to create an ownership culture needs to understand the subtleties, maybe sometimes not so subtle, of how they handle things in meetings. If there's a business performance review and the leader, the most senior ranking person in the meeting, really harps on, well, you said you were going to do that and you didn't do it. Well, then the next time the person has an idea, they're going to be very careful about what they say
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
they're going to they don't want that same experience. And so we have to encourage people to be transparent. We need to reward their transparency, and we need to recognize that sometimes when they're transparent about things and they don't work out, it wasn't because they were lying. It wasn't because they were trying to deceive you. Something just didn't work out. And
Hmm.
so to create the ownership culture with transparency works much better than trying to do it with the typical sort of secretive management we see in most companies.
Yeah, I love that idea. The idea of, you can fail and it's okay. What did we learn from that? So, on the heels of that, how important is autonomy in this kind of culture?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I would say autonomy is really important. Um, the one caveat I'll make is that it depends on the type of organization as to just how much autonomy you can give people. If you're in a really heavily networked organization where everybody's dependent on everybody else, think about a railroad, think about FedEx or UPS or the U.S. Postal Service. There's a limit to how much autonomy we can give anybody at any node in that network, for fear that they might do something that helps them but hurts some other department or some other part of the network. And so we have to be careful how much autonomy we can give. But yes, in general, most organizations would benefit from giving more autonomy, giving more local freedom to make decisions, giving people the training and the tools to make those decisions, the incentives to reinforce them, and then letting them go about their business. It is important that people can influence the outcomes. We just need to be a little measured in how we do it, depending on the type of organization.
So I'm convinced this is great. So let's dig in a little bit. How does a company go about building this kind of ownership culture? Where do you even start?
Over the years, we've refined the way we talk about the steps, and I think a few years ago with a lot of input from one of my colleagues, Riley Waitley, we came up with a methodology for sort of describing the steps that I think makes it really clear. We call it better, better, better. Yes, we have to have a fancy name, but the first better is better insights. We need better measures of performance that let people know where they're really being successful and where they're not, so they can really prioritize doing more of the good things and less of the bad things. And we need a measure that captures growth and profitability and the investment required, and really measures value creation. And with such a measure, if it's a really good measure, then up is good, down is bad is the sort of mantra.
Hmm.
So we can stop worrying about measuring against plan. We can always measure against last year and realize all those sort of transparency benefits that we talked about earlier. So the first step of better insights is having a really a much better measure of performance than traditional accounting measures. The second step then is to implement that in planning and decision making. So, lots of companies, for example, will have a capital plan and then they'll have a profit plan. And we think, why are those two separate plans? Why aren't they the same plan? When somebody says, I need more capital, why isn't the next question, well, how much profit is that going to produce? And so, sort of integrating the decision making so that, we're making, better decisions for the long term is really solid. And one of the most important parts of that is something we call strategic resource allocation, how you allocate resources around an organization in order to really grow the areas that you're good at and the areas where you can create value is an important part of things. And so better insights, better decisions. The third one is better behavior. And that involves two things. One is changing incentives, as I discussed earlier, so that, when people grow value, they get paid more, regardless of whether they planned for it. So we're encouraging them to plan high, to stretch for success.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of better behavior is just giving people better measures and incentives doesn't really tell them what to do. And so training, what we like to say, sort of decision-based or case-based training that teaches them how to use these tools to create more value really is important to getting the better decisions that we really want. So better insights, better decisions, better behaviors are the three sort of phases and steps that companies go through to sort of stick their toe in the water and eventually, really sort of jump in and swim in this, land of having an ownership culture.
Mm-hmm. So why does an ownership culture apply so well in the healthcare industry?
It does apply very well in healthcare. And I think there are a couple of reasons why that's true. I think in order to be successful as an organization, you need to care a lot about your customers. And in healthcare, we think about outcomes for patients. And the vast majority of people that go into healthcare have at least some feeling that they did so because they want to help patients. They want to help people get better. They want to serve in that way. And so I think there's perhaps a lot more focus on what's good for customers, what's good for patients in healthcare than in many other industries. And so I think that's a good starting point, and it's one of the important sort of legs on the ownership culture stool. The second one is that there are very scalable treatment technologies. There are lots of innovations and new ideas and things that come up that can be helpful to patients. And once they're proven to be successful and they make it through the regulatory hurdles and get approved, they can scale really quickly. So the ability to in an ownership culture really create success, other than maybe some areas of the tech industry or the tech sector, I think that healthcare probably has more opportunity for really creating value, that other areas don't. One area that I think about, for example, is the invention of the transcatheter aortic valve replacement, which a relative of mine received a few years ago. The ability to repair a faulty heart valve through a much less risky, much non-invasive approach is just a really great technology. And you just don't have those kinds of breakthrough innovations in every sector the way you do in healthcare. I mean, we care a lot about outcomes for patients, and that really stimulates this innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess also another reason why innovation happens is, because of the ability to defend innovation, right? The ability to, when you get approval for something and somebody else decides they want to compete with you, the time and money it takes for them to develop and get approved a competing idea gives you some period of time where you can achieve, meaningful financial success. And it's that carrot of that success, that you can defend for some period of time that I think is why so much innovation goes into healthcare. And I think that's a big reason for why the ownership cultures really work, in that environment.
Sure. I mean, are there any challenges faced specifically by healthcare systems when they're trying to create or maintain an ownership culture?
Well, I mean, I think if I think specifically about, many of the employees, especially those that are patient facing, they care a lot, right? They care, as I said, they care a lot more than people in a lot of other industries. Unfortunately, though, they're often dealing with a lot of stress because of the health of their patients, because of the hours they have to work, and for different reasons, and they can be that stress can be an obstacle, right? I think that you know getting people to feel like an owner is really helpful. Making sure that they can deliver the very best care that they can is important to them. So making sure the environment is supportive of that. So this doesn't just come off as platitudes, but we really care about creating an environment that, we really are going to be a more successful organization than other healthcare systems, is really important. And I also think, at the organizational level, I, I I meet a lot of companies that have taken risk management to a level that is stifling.
Mm.
And some hospitals are known for leading the pack and taking on new new techniques, new treatments in certain areas, and others are not. Others really lag in their thinking. And I think in order to really act like owners, I think we need to have a careful and prudent, but an open mind to the fact that things change and new treatments come along that are better. And we want to be, maybe not always the leaders in that, but we want to be quick to adopt things that are better for our patients.
Mm.
And, the risk aversion can stand in the way of that. So I think those are some of the challenges specifically that are faced.
Yeah, that's a fantastic perspective. Greg, I'm going to take some time out for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors. We are back. So, Greg, in this hiring market, particularly in healthcare, recruitment is always something to consider. Is the presence of an ownership culture something that job candidates value?
Yes, I mean, again, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but the vast majority of people, I think, prefer this kind of a culture, this kind of an environment. And so I think it helps attract and retain people. And so the getting people to think like an owner can be a challenge, especially with some organizations really having very very different cultures as a starting point. But the benefits of it, come in many ways, including the reduced cost of having to hire and replace people. The churn tends to go down, and so this can definitely help with even in a tough hiring market like we have now.
So, Fortuna Advisors, your company, can assist organizations in building ownership cultures. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're consultants. We're a group of people that have different skills from sort of strategy and corporate finance analytics and how to evaluate decisions to we have a group of change management experts. We do a lot of training and communication and so forth. And so organizations that engage with us, typically there's sort of a project to sort of test the waters and see how they like, the tools, the decision making, and so forth. We usually do a series of surveys and interviews to understand the culture and identify the specific gaps. Which of those 5 traits of an ownership culture do they already perform well on, and which ones really need improvement. And then the implementation process involves again the better insights, defining better measures of outcomes, better decisions, actually giving people the tools to be able to think and act more like an owner with an ability to apply it to decision making.
Mhm.
And of course better behaviors comes from incentives and training and so forth. So that's really that's a summary at a very high level of the type of work that we do to help
Mhm.
companies transform more toward an ownership culture.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing fantastic work. So, if we want to find out more about you, about Fortuna Advisors, where can we go?
Our website is fortuna-advisors.com, and there's plenty of information on there on everything we've discussed today, including over 100 articles in the publication section that are all available without having to register or sign up. And I mean, if there are people with questions, they can reach out to me at gregory.milano@fortuna-advisors.com.
Outstanding. And all those links will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Greg, it is time for our lightning round questions. And these are questions I like to ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So our first question is a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about creating ownership cultures. So in your opinion, Greg, which of these TV workplaces comes closest to achieving an ownership culture? AFC Richmond from Ted Lasso or The Office depicted in The Office?
This is a no-brainer. I'm a huge football fan, soccer fan. I'm a Liverpool supporter, I must say. So Ted Lasso is a great show, and I think I knew I would enjoy it because of the sport, but it's a great show because he really spends all of his time trying to get the best version out of the people that he's working with, whether they're the players or the people in management or people that he knows. And that's really, I think, very much like what we try to do with the ownership culture framework. Ted Lasso is inspirational.
Yeah, I agree. From the very first episode, I was like, this show is about leadership.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, next question. What is the best book that you've read recently?
Actually, it's The Long Game by Dory Clark. She does a great job of helping people in their own personal lives and careers to be willing at times to invest in your future and to think about your own personal life, much the way we try and encourage our clients to think about their corporate success. So it's a great book, The Long Game by Dory Clark.
Nice. All right, what is your favorite thing about the work that you do?
I find it very inspirational just to see the changes happen inside companies. To see people behaving differently for the good is just unbelievably satisfying.
Very nice. All right, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
Keep it simple.
That is excellent advice. Last question, who or what inspires you?
Well, I mentioned Liverpool before, and Jurgen Klopp, the manager of Liverpool, is just an unbelievable inspiration as a leader in terms of setting aggressive aspirational goals and then doing the hard work to get there and really getting a group of players that really have it so overachieved versus what anybody would have expected of them as he put the team together. It's an inspiration to see a leader that inspires people the way he does.
Excellent. Greg, thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to our listeners. Once again, this is your reminder to grab the companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR or you know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And last but certainly not least, to make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR, I hope you subscribe to the podcast. Drop the Project HR team a line, leave us a review, or give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it for me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.